Good afternoon. This is Media Center, Ukraine, Odesa. We are starting for today. Our first briefing is dedicated to the establishment of the International Center for the Prosecution of Crimes of Aggression against Ukraine. And yesterday it was announced in The Hague. Our guest is Mykola Pashkovskyi, researcher at the Stashys Research Institute for the Study of Crime Problems of the National Academy of Legal Science, PhD in Law, Associate Professor, Attorney at Law. So, could you please share details about the possible consequences of the establishment of the mentioned center? Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you for your taking interest in this very important event that will ensure the bringing to the liability because of the crimes of aggression against Ukraine. This is the next step to create the international system to prosecute people who are guilty in severe crimes, including crimes of aggression. This is not the first step, and this is not the last step either. The question of establishment of international mechanism for the prosecution of crimes of aggression against Ukraine was at the table since the first day of the full-scale invasion of last year. 40 international intellectual policymakers, lawyers signed the statement saying about the necessity of establishment international tribunal for the prosecution of crimes of aggression against Ukraine, and this is when the work started to develop and establish such mechanism. And the International Center for the Prosecution of Crimes of Aggression against Ukraine is one of the steps, one of the blocks in the international justice for the prosecution of crimes of aggression against Ukraine. During the presentation, one of the participants said that just 4 months after it was announced, the center is presented. But the announcement was just four months ago. But the war started in February 2014. It doesn't mean that we should date discussion like back 4 months ago, but as I've already mentioned, the work was started at the end of February last year. But the specifics of the international mechanisms requires finding compromise to achieve agreements between the stakeholders and different states to establish such mechanism. Ukraine and international partners supporting Ukraine in its struggle against Putin. This is an anti-Putin coalition. Take measures in several areas. We are not talking here about the mechanism established at the level of the EU. There is also the Council of Europe, the UN, in the bilateral format. And I would like to bring your attention once again to the fact that in February, March 2022, there was the idea to establish the International Tribunal for the prosecution of crimes of aggression against Ukraine, requiring to unite efforts for pre-court parties, prosecutors, to develop the position, strategy, etc. The EU member states, the neighboring states, are Poland, Lithuania, Litva, and Estonia. There was an idea to unite prosecutor structures or groups of the mentioned state to make their activities more targeted and more tailored. You mentioned several areas in the world for the efforts to fight against Kremlin and against Putin. And one of these areas, one of the group of tasks is an attempt to block, to confiscate state and non-state assets in the United States and in Europe owned by Russian citizens. Is the establishment of the Prosecution Center brings us closer to such confiscation or seizure? The discussions are in all parliaments of the interested states, especially the partners of Ukraine in this struggle. The confiscation, reimbursement, and the individual criminal liabilities, all these are the part of the general liability issues. So there is a wide legal front line which is related to bring into accountability persons and organizations, including legal entities who are responsible for aggression and for other severe crimes against Ukraine. And there are several sectors of this wide front of legal work. The first sector, which also related to the Prosecution Center, is the bringing to accountability natural persons for the aggression against Ukraine. The next sector is the reimbursement of damages against Ukraine. And in the beginning of May, the first part of such mechanism was created. This is the International Register of Laws. And the register, as the International Center, are established in The Hague, and the information will be collected there. The next stage is to create the Compensation Commission and the Compensation Fund. And the third sector covers the reimbursement or compensation of losses as a result of the aggression against Ukraine. Here we can speak about freezing of assets of the Russian Federation and legal and natural entities that have links with this aggression, and the mechanism how to compensate these losses. So now there are talks about the necessity to freeze such assets if they're in the jurisdiction of a specific state. Such material assets or other funds can be arrested, and the Russian Federation can no longer use these assets. And there is also the question what to do with these arrested assets. Could they be given to Ukraine, etc.? It is now discussed by the national parliaments because there is the notion of sovereign immunity of the state over its assets. This is the old international traditions. There is the whole complex of common law issues, and they just need to agree everything at the national level and at the international level. And all the states should be proactive because these tools can be used against some states in the future. So the first decision can be the use of these assets on the territory of the specific states. These assets can be in banks or some enterprises. Now there is the approach that the profits from these assets can be transferred to Ukraine, and these are billions of the United States dollars. And in the framework of the EU, there has been established a working group which deals with these issues, how to freeze these assets, and they also monitor the fulfillment of sanctions against the persons that are under these sanctions. Since 2014, sanctions has been introduced against Russia and also its legal and natural entities. But it has been found out that there are a lot of breaches, and that's why in 2022 the EU initiated amendments to the National Code to introduce criminal liability for the failure to follow sanctions. I have a question, but I would like to give floor to my colleague. Good afternoon. You've mentioned the accountability, individual accountability of natural entities. And there is a separate proceedings because of the kidnapping of Ukrainian children. What consequences can we expect? If the people involved in these illegal activities, could they be arrested if they are on the territory of the jurisdiction of the countries who would agree to do this? This is the first question. And the second question with relation to the establishment of the International Center for the Prosecution of Crimes for aggression against Ukraine. What does this center means for organizations that are involved in gathering evidence to prove these crimes of aggression? Of course, I expect that you would answer that they should continue their work, but where are all these data accumulated? I would like to start from the second question, which is quite difficult. The NGOs and for the illegal activists that have been documenting like war and other severe crimes. These are genocide and the crimes against humanity. The establishment of the International Center does not change the task of these NGOs. The International Center for the Prosecution of Crimes of Aggression against Ukraine is just a platform to coordinate activities of different stakeholders that are the prosecutors of 6 EU member states and Ukraine. They will coordinate their efforts using these centers, so they will not have their own investigation activities. Their tasks is to identify national legal systems, the prosecution and different legal proceedings that exist there, and what tools should be implemented to investigate the crimes of the Russian Federation and also the leadership of the Republic of Belarus, and how to use this evidence in the future. So their task is to collect all evidence, to create one or several files for legal proceedings, to identify crimes that could be investigated by the national courts of like Baltic countries, etc., and also what evidence could be used for the special tribunal as soon as it is established. So this is a coordination parties who will mainly deal with the crimes of aggression, because other crimes are covered by other international tools. For example, last summer, to aggregate all evidence collected at the level of the European Union and the crimes related to the crimes on the territory of Ukraine. The single electronic database of evidence related to severe international crimes was established. Ukraine and other states have been uploading information to this database, and this could be used by different mechanisms, including the International Criminal Court that has been investigating situation in Ukraine. As for another question of yours, these are the questions related to investigations that have been conducted by the International Criminal Court in 2014, 2015. Ukraine was not the part of the Rome Statute, acknowledged the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, so acknowledging that the International Criminal Court and the Prosecutor's Office can investigate international crimes committed since the 21st of November 2013. On the 2nd of March 2022, after the full-scale invasion, the prosecutor, Kareem, the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, announced that the investigation was launched to investigate the situation in Ukraine. And in the framework of this investigation, the task of the prosecutor is to establish the worst systematic, wide-scale crimes of genocide, war crimes, and the crimes against humanity have been committed in the framework of this armed conflict. And since the International Criminal Court has been looking for leaderships, it is very important to establish liability of the highest official, because they can manage the state and they can take measures to stop offenses or violations that are committed under their leadership. Kareem, as the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, has been looking not only for the most severe, worst crimes, but also establishes the relation of the highest official in these crimes. And in 2023, following the statement, the address of the International Criminal Court issued a secret arrest order to arrest the president of Russia, Putin, and also the children ombudsman of the office of the president of the Russian Federation, Maria Lvova-Belova, because they are suspected in committing international war crimes, the forced deportation of people, mainly Ukrainian children, to the territory of the Russian Federation. Why did the International Criminal Court select that case? Because this is the really severe crime, one of the worst crimes, because around 700,000 children have been moved to the territory of the Russian Federation. This number is enormous. Secondly, we know that they use psychological pressure on these children just to ensure their de-Ukrainization. So they call it in the Russian Federation that they want to somehow re-raise them. And of course, this is a high-scale crime that is committed under the umbrella of the Russian leadership. We know that in 2022, Putin ordered to simplify the procedure for acquiring Russian citizenship by minors that are adopted by Russian families. And of course, that was aiming at Ukraine, at the Ukrainian case. It is also known that on the eve of that event, Putin met Lvova-Belova, where he just expressed his support of this practice. The leadership of the Russian Federation has documented themselves, proving that they are committing this crime, and the prosecutor's office had just to go to the next stage to initiate the criminal case against specific persons to get order to arrest them. And we will be just waiting for the statement of the prosecutor, Kareem, with the respective requests to the states that could just work with the International Criminal Court. And we know that there's now the problem with the leadership of the Southern African Republic, because they are planning the event and they have invited Putin to this. And this republic is the part to the Rome Statute, And according to Article 28 of the document, the heads of the state do not have immunity against the International Criminal Court. So if they follow the rules, and if Putin gets to the territory of any member state of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, the state should arrest Putin and hand him over to the International Criminal Court. So this case can be sent to the International Criminal Court only subject to physical presence of Putin and Belova. And that can take a lot of time according to the experience with other heads of states that have been accused by the International Criminal Court. I have a question to practice. When it comes to responsibility of the leadership of Russia, there is the analog with Yugoslavia, and if I'm not mistaken, Kareem was the part of the tribunal back then. And the question is the following question: do the European member states and international bodies should invent some new mechanisms and tools to prosecute the leadership of Russia and Russia, the state, for crimes of aggression against Ukraine and other war crimes? It should be said that now we are facing quite a unique situation, and the practice of bringing to liability for crimes of aggression is there, but that was only once, or to be precise, twice. That was after the Second World War. There were international war tribunals for the European states and for the Nazi Germany, and also for Far East for the leadership of Japan. After those events in 1945, 1946, there were no other precedents of activities of the international tribunals for bringing to accountability for crimes of aggression against countries. Ad hoc tribunals in Yugoslavia and Rwanda and other international special ad hoc courts, they worked with other international crimes like genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. Of course, there is some practice of this work, and of course, the Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine and Ukrainian courts, they will base their activities on the practice of the International Criminal Courts and the ad hoc tribunal. And of course, that now there is a significant burden on the law enforcement bodies in the courts of Ukraine. Why is it so? So it seems that the case has been investigated by the International Criminal Court, and more than 20 states, following the rules of universal personal jurisdictions, has opened their own cases, but 99.9% of all registered war crimes and other international crimes will be investigated in Ukraine, and Ukrainian courts will bring those involved into responsible to liability. The official website of the Office of the General Prosecutor contains statistics with the registered international crimes. The statistics keep changing every day. And as of today, more than 93,000 of war crimes have been registered. These are the facts, episodes. As for proceedings, there are around 50,000 of them, but this number is also enormous. Before, we did not have specialized bodies, and the security service of Ukraine is responsible for such cases. But now the national policy, the state investigation bureau are involved in the process. In 2019, the special department was created under the prosecutor's office, and it was reformed in 2022. to deal with the war crimes. So in Ukraine, we already have the established system of law enforcement bodies that will be responsible for prosecution of such international crimes. And there are court proceedings. More than 50 persons have been already sentenced, in particular for war crimes. And there is also the practice of sentencing people for crimes of aggression, but this number is not that big because to establish responsibility of liabilities of different heads, political leadership, to military commanders, huge work should be done to establish and to prove links, procedures, structures, and it will take time to get the real criminal prosecution for the leadership of the Russian Federation. Are there any other questions? You also had a question about where journalists should address. This is always our concern. The Office of the General Prosecutor nominated to the International Center for the Prosecution of Crimes of Aggression 4 prosecutors, and all this information will be available in the General Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine. So journalists should address their requests and questions to the International Center for the Prosecution of Crimes of Aggression against Ukraine. They have trained hard, actually, and I was partially involved in training of prosecutors and charges, and I can see that there is everyday work that started on the first day of the full-scale invasion. Before the full-scale invasion, there was a department, but it was not very big, under the umbrella of the General Prosecutor's Office. But now the whole structure has been developed, starting from the headquarters to the local, regional levels. And how prosecutors have been trained after the full-scale invasion started? There was the core team, the core group of prosecutors, which is the Department on War Crimes, and they have been dealing with these issues since 2019. There is the Prosecutor's Office of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea that has been dealing with these issues since 2014. So we cannot say that there is no practitioners in Ukraine related to these issues. We have such professionals, we have such practitioners, and now they are responsible for training other prosecutors and experts. There is the whole range of specialized NGOs in Ukraine that have not only been documenting everything, but they have been also raising awareness about the application of international law in Ukraine. They have been supporting the state bodies, courts, to also train people, and there is also significant support by the international community. Today, you've already mentioned that Kareem was one of the lawyers at the Yugoslavia tribunal, but there is a huge number of judges and lawyers that worked in different cases. The former Yugoslav states also had the armed conflict, and they investigated war crimes and genocide crimes. They have been also involved in the process. Only over the last month, the Office of the General Prosecutor has issued the standards for investigating war crimes. This is now the blueprint for judges how to investigate war crimes. And I have a small question to you. This is a very important piece of work. In March 2022, the international community has doubts if the Ukrainian law enforcement and court system was able to deal with war crimes. This is not a question anymore. The question is when. How have prosecutors been selected for those activities? Have they volunteered, or do they need to have some special international background? How was the process organized? Prosecutors have their specialization. For example, the prosecutors who just are responsible for proceedings in case of violation of rights of children or in case of sexual crimes. There are prosecutors who are responsible for investigating homicides. So prosecutors have some areas of their responsibility. There is the environmental prosecutors who are responsible for investigating environmental crimes. And when it comes to war crimes, this is linked to some areas. For example, sexual violence against women, men, prisoners of war, civilians, very widespread. And this area is now covered by prosecutors who used to work with, so to say, civilian sexual violence. They have trained how to work with such crimes when it comes to the war. As for the explosion at Kakhovka HPP TEM, and now this case is being told by the prosecutors who've had experience of working with environmental crimes, because there is a huge impact in the ecosystem. And over the year, the base of such prosecutors have developed. Now we have the whole corps of prosecutors and investigators and people who deal directly with war crimes. When it comes to district prosecutors' offices in Odesa, how many people there are involved in documenting now? They are regional prosecutors' offices where they have units to deal with war crimes. But these are prosecutors' offices of those regions where there is the front line, or those who are occupied or have been occupied: Dnipro, Zaporizhzhia, Luhansk, Donetsk, Mykolaiv, Kherson, Kyiv, Zhytomyr, Chernihiv, Sumy regions. They have special units now, and their prosecutors deal only with the war crime or the crimes related or linked to the armed conflict. In Odesa Regional Prosecutor's Office, there is no specialized unit. That's why in this work are involved those prosecutors that have been appointed by the regional prosecutor. There is the deputy prosecutor. So there are people, but there is no special unit. So do they believe that this is prestige work? Please don't forget about the mic. So this is a great responsibility, and I think they understand their responsibility. At least those prosecutors whom I've met, and including during the training sessions, they understand the uniqueness and importance of the mission. Thank you, Mykola, for being with us today. And now I would like to just ask journalists to cover such topics. So we will gladly share the context of experts that can provide information to the journalists. If the press service of the General Prosecutor's Office is not that quick, there are independent experts who will share the information. In 25 minutes, we will have the next briefing. We will have with us the director of Odesa Zoo with some animals who have been rescued by volunteers after the flood caused by the explosion at Kakhovka HPP dam. Stay tuned.